Hi, everyone, and welcome to part three of the Energy Expert Stories series, which is powered by Sebenzana. I'm so grateful to have you here listening and watching this show and listening to the platform. I'm so grateful for your interactions, for the wonderful feedback that you've given us in order for us to continue building the community and building the platform. I'd encourage you to subscribe to the podcast on whatever platform you are listening to this and go to our website, which is impactfulconversations.co.za, to let us know how you're experiencing the platform and to, submit your questions. Today, I am absolutely delighted to welcome to the virtual room Thabo Molekoa, who I will briefly introduce in a second. He's the Managing Director of Siemens Energy in Southern and Eastern Africa, where he is shaping the energy of tomorrow in order to make the transition to a sustainable world. He's a mechanical engineer by qualification from the University of Cape Town, so we have a commonality there in terms of the university we studied at. With his GCC, he also holds a Master of Business Administration from the University of Pretoria. He's previously CEO of Thyssenkrupp's Sub-Saharan African region and is currently a non-executive chairman of the board of the Makana Energy Wind Farm. He's passionate and active in bringing about a productive, sustainable, and industrial Africa. And I'm thrilled to be able to chat to him about it today. Thabo, a very good morning to you. Welcome to Impactful Conversations. How are you doing this morning?
I'm well, Tafatwa, and thanks for the invitation.
It's awesome to have you here. So, Thabo, we typically start off our episodes just by giving the listener a chance to get to know you a little bit better. It's also a bit of a sort of reflection down memory lane for you. So tell us a little bit about yourself in the sense of, where were you born, where did you grow up, and what are you passionate about?
Yeah, so I call myself a proper Gauteng. I grew up in the East Rand, in Davidton, actually, and it wasn't as pleasant during those times. It's a bit rough, and later on, I finished my schooling in Pretoria, actually. So back then, it was part of the Buputatswana, government before the transition. And that's where I finished my schooling. So having straddled between the East Rand and Pretoria, I could fully say that I'm a proper Gauteng. So that's where I grew up. And then career-wise, we can talk about it. But I think one of the instrumental things for me when I grew up, and that probably talks to the passion, was around the people. So we grew up in a space where we saw people suffering. We grew up in a space where we saw people not having enough opportunities. So for me, it then becomes important to talk about how do we create a productive Africa. Obviously, in the spaces, you would tackle the space that you're in. But for me, it was around productivity has to do with people fulfilling their own ambitions, people growing outside of the spaces they're in, and helping the next one next to them, and so forth. So what I'm really passionate about for me, and even in the intro, you mentioned it, it's really around how do we advance Africans.
Amazing.
And sometimes the question of advancing Africans does not say we are ignoring Europeans or Americans and so on. All it says is what can we collectively do to advance Africa, to advance the fellow next to you, and so on. So that's really what, call it, revs my engine from a passion perspective, day to day, that guides the work that I do and the interactions that I end up with and doing.
Yeah, I absolutely love that, right? In terms of advancing, Africa, and I love the focus that you have on people. I think that's really, really inspiring and quite insightful. If we dive into your career, firstly, talk to me about your passion for engineering. Where did that begin? Was it sort of at varsity level or before then? Where did that start?
Yeah, it's I've been. Someone asked me that a few months ago. Especially around career choices.
Mm,
What do you pick? I don't know when it actually started, whether it started or it was already there.
mm,
But I think for me as a mechanical engineer, I've always been intrigued about stripping things out and then try and put them together. I probably do the worst job trying to put them together, but I'm excellent in putting them apart. But I've always been inquisitive about what makes something work and how do you find other ways to make it better.
mm,
So that inquisitiveness, perhaps, I mean, during our time, you couldn't pin it down to a specific career that you could point to, but at least it leads you into spaces where somebody can say, that sounds like you right space for engineering and so on. Because I in metric, probably at metric actually, somebody approached me and said, look, there's a bursaries going around for engineering. I said,
mm,
oh, okay, what is that? you know um, and that's how I ended up in mechanical engineering,
mm.
as opposed to electrical or electronic and so on, because I just loved the essence of going back to basics and how things work and so on. So that's where it started, and then when you start opening up the book and the universe around engineering, then you get more and more interested in not only the mechanical part, the electrical, and so on. So um, the passion started perhaps at a young age. I had an uncle who could strip out an engine of a car and and put it back together, and always been fascinated. And how did you know that? So that's really where my passion perhaps got ignited.
Yeah, that's awesome. I think, you know, the sort of inquisitiveness is something I can relate to. In terms of, what actually makes things work, what makes them tick, what are the building blocks, what are the parts that, the sum of the parts that makes the whole, what are those parts? Um, if you've obviously got your GCC qualification and so on, and obviously that, means that at some point in your career, you went about getting sort of the hands-on operational experience. And I want to know, in what way was that important to your perspective and particularly decision making now? And, adding on to that, what advice would you sort of give to young engineers and professionals who are starting out their careers with that perspective in mind?
Mm. Actually, I didn't finish the GCC.
Mm,
I started, got halfway through, and then switched, and I'll tell you the reason.
mm,
So I mean, I'm a De Beers person, so right. So I got sponsored by De Beers from an early age,
mm,
from Matric, and ever since then I've been in the mining space. So first, let's call it school break or
mm,
varsity break. You'll be you have to pick a mine that you have to go to. So at first, I think it was a bit of a rude awakening around, hang on, I'm an engineer. Why do I have to put on overalls and safety shoes? And you don't first understand that, right?
mm,
So, and I think the picture in the engineering training program, you are brought in, and with an understanding that you are going to become a manager, right?
mm,
So you then don't understand, why then do I have to spend time on the operational level?
mm,
What if we just skip to the managerial aspect? Uh, yes, I mean, that's our naivety at the time.
mm,
Um, but I have grown to appreciate it. I have moved on to various roles, various organizations.
mm,
And first, the thing that I almost always do
mm.
is operations. I get down to what really makes this organization, what makes this department,
Yeah.
where's the heart of it? Because um, at the time, at least for us in the engineering space, you were judged by technical competence, and you could be book smart, but then, I mean, we found, especially in mines, what humbled us was you find an old, experienced person with the metric, but they've been in the mine for a very long time, and then they are able to almost disprove your theories because of their operational experience, right? And then that's where this first appreciation that actually this is an important ingredient in one's career and journey, right down to working down with an artisan and understanding the artisan aid, you know, being able to give that an ear is quite important when you start. So once you've understood those, and you start getting into then using your knowledge, we'll call it from a varsity perspective and books perspective, but then couple it with the operational experience, you then effectively are much more empowered and enabled, if you like, to make better decisions. Because some of the decisions we do, we don't always have perfect information, but I think if you have the operational experience, then you are able to enhance some of the decision making that you do. So that's where for me it became call it almost a nice ingredient around how do you enhance your decision making.
And I think, you know, talking about, you know, really getting to grips with the sort of makings of the operations is, you know, something quite important, and really understanding, you know, what makes things tick, what makes things work, how do things work, how long do certain things take as well, I think is also really important to understand. I think if you're coming from a theoretical background, you might not, you know, understand why a certain, you know, task may take 6 hours when in theory it should take 1 hour. But you forget the sort of steps, you know, that actually need to take place for that task to happen. So I think it's incredibly important what you shared there, for sure.
Yeah, and I think you know, there's always a question I always get because we almost every role that I've always surrounded myself with young people, younger than I am, certainly. But I think the question is always, you know, so what should I do, right? You know, and the one piece of advice that I always lead to is patience. So don't rush through your career. Don't rush through jumping into managerial. Is spending enough time at the level that you're in to excel. And I think we often don't encourage that. I think it's if there's a few months ago I got asked by new graduates joining the organization, and they said, so you know what would you advise us? I said master the craft, right, that you're in. Because it will help you in the next level and the next year. And that's something that engineers, we don't have a lot of time for. You know, because when you're a project manager, there's no time to go learn.
You have to know.
You have to deliver at the level that you've been given and are sitting in. So that for me is a good reflection, and I have seen it in various roles I've played in running operations and so on. Once you run an operation, you don't have time to go learn what you should have learned as an engineer or as a production person.
Yeah. I think that's an exceptionally important piece of advice, for sure. And you know, I think anybody who's listening to this, for sure, is grateful to actually hear that from you, and yeah, along with myself, for sure. Let's talk leadership, Rick. How would you describe your leadership style now? And I'm curious, has it evolved over time, or has it always been like that?
Yeah, you know, this is one topic that is very tough. I say it's very tough. Is, you know, that look, I'm a technical person coming from an engineering, and as a technical person, if you want to know what is a speed of X, you know, you will get the speed of X. It might be to the nearest decimal or whatever, right? It's precise.
Yeah.
But leadership is it's such a strange and tough topic because there is no definite answer, nor is there a definite style that works universally. My leadership journey has evolved from, if you're in production, it's very tough to to run a consultative leadership style, consensus seeking, and sometimes you look at construction managers or people in production or in dangerous spaces, or sometimes you talk to, we do some business with the Navy, and so you talk to people who are in the Army, and so it's very difficult to say precisely this is the style. But what I have seen for me, what has evolved, I have moved from more authoritative and almost pushing more, and which is where I find my comfort, is around a consultative style. And it requires extreme patience, but also I find that it's a lot more sustainable for me, for my energy, and also if you running an organization with various departments and so on, you cannot be everywhere every time. So you have to empower people, you have to work with people consultatively, so that they are then in their own spaces are able to make the right decisions and the right call. So always, almost, you'll find my door is always open. So I consultative. It does not mean, by the way, if you're consultative, that you're indecisive. No, I am. However, I think it's important that the next person leaves much better off, much more empowered to then take the next decisions and so on. I mean, I recall where I really saw, because I switched when I was a bit more authoritative. So when I was growing up in operations, to get promoted, especially in the mining environment, you had to be able to bang your fist on the table and shout, and you could throw a chair, you would probably get promoted immediately. Because that was a signal to say you are ready for the next level. You can run a production and so on. I recall I didn't do any of those, and then I recall one day I lost my temper, and then yes, I banged the fist on the table. And then after the meeting, my boss came to me and said, "Yeah, I think you're ready for the next level." That conversation has always stuck with me around how can that be a right leadership essential and skill, right? So from those days to where I am now, it's basically a huge evolution. I see now a lot more sustainability around it. I see people, you want people to be able to speak up, you want people to be able to approach you, and I think that for me is something that's important around leadership. It is not precise, but I think this one, at least this style, for now, for me, it works well.
This is such an interesting, topic which I could talk for hours about, because I think you're right in the sense that they're the sort of different styles. I also think certain environments sometimes are used to a particular style, whereby it becomes more difficult to use, for example, a consultative approach in an authoritative environment. It almost seems counterintuitive, but sometimes in those environments that's actually where it works best, to empower people to make the right decisions. But I think I take a lot of interest in the fact that your leadership style has evolved almost in a sort of chalk and cheese type format, where it went from sort of the authoritative to the sort of consultative side of things. So that's incredibly intriguing and insightful. And I think both approaches are, or rather, let me say, the consultative approach, you're right, there does require a bit of patience, which is a cost in some areas as well. But I think, when done right, you really do actually empower people, to make the right decision when the time comes, because you can't be everywhere at the same time, for sure.
And I think, Thabos, the issue is, because it's tough, it doesn't mean, and it demands more, it doesn't mean it's not right.
Yeah.
So sometimes, because it demands a lot more from me, it demands a lot more sessions of consultations and consensus. It doesn't mean it's a wrong approach.
Absolutely.
I think sometimes we try and equate this is too much effort, therefore it might not be the right. No, it is the right thing to do. It is also good to see a leader imparting and enabling others to become leaders as well.
Yes.
Demands
I think that's how you build, right? That's actually how you build the future, is to actually empower people to make the decisions. There's I think there's a quote by a famous author which talks about, a leader's legacy, that the people that you lead must be able to survive without you, because you have empowered them to actually make the right decisions in your absence. So we started off quite fast, talking about your life, your journey, leadership, advice to young professionals and so on. But if I turn it down slowly, you must be an incredibly busy individual. I'm curious, how you wind down. What do you do to relax, to take your heart rate down after a busy week or after a busy day?
Yeah, I'm not sure that world exists, but let's see. Look, time is it's a bit tough for me to find the time. But I do have a number of activities that I enjoy. So I love the outdoors. If I had more time, actually, I would spend it camping. So I do a lot of those. So a typical winding down session for me would be one where I can keep quiet and either read a book out somewhere in the wild, right? So that very, very often, rarely actually happens. So other than that, I mean, in Joburg, quite busy. So, but what I do normally, I would do go for a run. That's normally the first thing, either maybe in the morning or the afternoons. But go for a run or something like that. And then the space that I also have, it's I've got young kids, so it's family.
Of course.
During the week or when things are intense, I rarely actually spend time with them. So that becomes my other alternative. So after the run and so on, I'll then wind down with the family and spend some time with them. So that's really how I tend to wind down. Hardly watch TV.
Sure.
I don't think we have a TV in the house that anyone watches. So yeah.
Yeah, and I think time is a precious, commodity. Particularly, I think for yourself, I think it must be incredibly busy, and all the more grateful for me to be able to chat to you about your journey and what we're going to speak about in a moment. But before we get there, what's a typical day in your life? So what's a typical, if you walk me through it, what time does it start? What do you do when you start it? What time does it typically end? How does it sort of ebb and flow? How does it ramp up, ramp down?
Yeah, I would define it as a flow, right? Not I don't think I have a typical day. A typical day is what I would wish for, which actually hardly actually happens that way. So I'll tell you about my ideal day in my head, right? It just deviates substantially sometimes from that. So ideally, I would. I'm a 5 a.m. Actually, I'm not a morning person. Interesting enough. because I see it on weekends. I would sleep in on a weekend, but ideally during the week, 5 a.m. and then I'll start off with some quiet time, a bit of meditation and so on, and then ease into some exercises and stretches and so on. And then ideally from there, when you open the door, look at emails, that's when it deviates, right? But what I tend to do, and I've somehow think I found a sweet spot, is I want to take my kids to school. So that's the time that the team also knows that no, just give him time to drop off the kids before it starts raining, right? So so that I do that, and then I grab my first coffee in the morning. And then the first thing that I'll do is look at the calendar and look at the activities and so on, and then jump into emails. So that's typically how it starts off, and then normally the first sort of morning meetings, and then jump into topics, and then it really starts quietening down, call it after 4, after 5, and then I can have my own time to do other aspects and so on. And then later in the evening or early evening, then I would look at the following day and some of the strategic topics and so on. And then head home, right? So for dinner, and then open up the laptop again in the evening. So mostly get to the day, end the day around 11 p.m. So if a typical one is around 11 p.m., then I would head off to bed. So from a you describe the flow. I flow perspective. I normally use my energy levels. I follow my energy levels. So in the morning they're not that great, and then it sort of picks up until about lunchtime, and then it drops off again, and then strangely enough it picks up in the afternoon. So I become more that's why I sleep late. I become more active from late afternoon till midnight at times. So that's how so I put tasks depending on how much effort and thinking they require in those sort of energy spells.
Okay. And I think one of the most important things is actually knowing, yourself, knowing, what you or when you peak in the energy level space, so that you can sort of plan accordingly, but also knowing when the sort of energy levels are depleted, so that you can slow down, and when you have energy again to speed up. I think it's an incredibly important aspect and skill actually, which takes some time to learn for sure. So thanks very much for sharing that with us. It's quite insightful. And now I want us to talk about building the future, particularly for South Africa and Africa at large, with a particular focus on energy. So I suppose, firstly, let's take stock. Let's talk resources, right? Obviously, South Africa has a diverse resource landscape, particularly in the energy space. How do you think we should be thinking about our resource landscape in South Africa at the moment?
Yeah, if you asked me a few years ago, it would be a different answer. But now, I think, and I'll speak specifically for energy, right? I'm of the view now than before that we probably have to think more regionally. So if you want to talk about the energy landscape or resource energy landscape for South Africa, I would say maybe broaden the topic a bit more about regionally, because if you want to solve a problem in South Africa, you cannot ignore Lesotho, Swaziland. So we almost have to think regionally. And the reason I say so is some countries are not as well endowed as others.
Of course.
And therefore, if you ignore the others, it then also compounds your issues. I spoke a few months ago in a conference, and I said we have to think of how do we build a regional transmission system. And I called it a sort of an Africa super grid, right? Where anyone who's got power is able to then put power in that grid, and then it gets evenly shared. Because also out of my interest and passion around making Africa productive, you can't have 100% electrification rate in South Africa, and yet Lesotho sits much lower, right? So we have to have that conversation. So how I think about the resource landscape for South Africa, I think what South Africa has is well endowed, of course, but it also has to think regionally. And it's easier for us. We've got coal, we've got great sunshine, we've got wind, and, we're well endowed. However, we don't have much gas, right? So, and we do need it. So if we are not thinking regionally, then we might not able to benefit from what gas could do for us. And similarly, the other regions as well.
Yeah, and I think that's an incredibly important perspective, because ultimately, together, if we work together, we can actually build a much more sustainable, much more robust energy system that's able to actually empower, many, many more people, many more millions, tens of millions of people together. And I think you're right. Often we do think of it sort of as in isolation, to say, well, how do we solve the problem here? But then we say, well, actually, hang on, we need to think a bit broader. What about our neighboring countries, who, for example, may have natural gas, that we can, for example, to think slightly differently from a regional perspective. And I think really that's an interesting perspective on how we can build energy security within Africa.
And also, I mean, having if you travel around, right? So you would see, why are we having a Europe? It's because they thought regionally.
Yeah.
Didn't think Germany, France, no, they thought regionally. And the minute they started to talk regionally, it does not say you do not have self-interest. No, of course you do. But I think you open up a door to cater for what your neighbor has. How can you use it, and vice versa? And then you start having a much more successful region and a block. And I think that's something that we shouldn't give up on. That's why I'm quite excited about the Africa Free Trade, strengthening that and getting that into reality, because it'll open up and unlock some of these, right?
For sure.
Yeah.
For sure. I think that's an incredibly, important point. Just around the fact that actually it probably, it still does empower South Africa, even more so than if we just thought in isolation, for sure. So who do you think are the essential role players in this discussion in terms of, building the energy future, and more, also adding on to that question, what is the role of the sort of young professional in South Africa currently within this discussion as well?
Yeah, I'll start with the last point. I think one of the things that I don't see a lot is, at least I wish it could be a bit more than what it is currently, is young people playing a role in shaping energy future, right? So the reason I want to see that a lot more is they probably will sit with these decisions that were taken. I won't be there, so you and the others are going to sit with some of the decisions that we're taking. So I think that's a first sort of a reflection that I have, is that I think we tend to leave a lot of the younger people out, and they too need to play a much more stronger role in some of the decisions and shaping it. So I think that's call it one of the role players. I think that's one that we probably have to do a bit more on. But I think the core of if we want to build the energy future, the core for me, especially we see it in Africa, is around the public sector side. So this is from a policy perspective, because I was having a conversation yesterday with someone that if we are able to give certainty on policy, it then invites everybody else to come and then plow into that, building that sector, right? And I think that's for me the first sort of a necessary ingredient. And then from there, then you can have your financiers, your developers, and so on, the rest of them. But I think if you are able to give comfort, you are able to give certainty, if you are able to give assurance on policy, the particular in South Africa's case, we are going to take, then it opens up a lot more opportunity. Because even the young people we talk about around training, around upskilling or experience and building up their knowledge base and so on, they all stem from a sense that as a private sector, I have a certainty about what the government is going to do, what the policy direction is, that enables us to then employ more, train more, and so on. So I think we first have to look at what is the prerequisite, and then from the necessary role players will come in. And then I think just to circle back on the young professionals one, there is a role. I think if anything, I wish we could see a lot more. In my preference, I would probably I'd like to see a lot more engineers in decision-making roles, because there's a lot that demands a bit of a science. We approach a lot of decisions, in my view. So I think there is a role. Perhaps maybe we're not opening as many doors for those young professionals to come in and play an active role in it. But I think it's something that I still wish they could come closer and get into, also having a say to some of these decisions that are being taken.
And I think, when you talk about policy, right, that's almost the foundation to the house that we're building. When you talk about certainty, the image in my head is a strong foundation. In terms of what is the actual foundation that we're going to build this, energy house of the region, of the future. What is that foundation? And I think it is incredibly important to have young people who are decision makers, as you rightly point out, because they are the ones who are going to have to live with the decisions. Because often the consequences is felt, much later. Equally so, the benefits as well are also felt much later on, a generation or two past, for sure.
No, I like that. I think the foundation certainly is that, and I think it's also about the sense of building a stronger pipeline, right, of decision makers, on the chain. Then when you hand over, we are handing over to something that could always be added on and improved on, as opposed to always rehashing and restarting again, right? That you don't see that progressive growth.
Yeah, and it is an interesting sort of landscape that is changing. I mean, even this week alone, we saw, an interesting announcement around, the 1 megawatt to 100 megawatt, cap that's been lifted on, providing power without, a license. Obviously, there will still need to be licensing and all of that to connect to the grid, to make sure that everything is everything is sound and in the right space. But I think it is an interesting sort of landscape in terms of the policy the policy landscape currently in South Africa. But I think even more so is the need for us to have this discussion and for us to engage on this topic, to build, the community of, professionals, people who, want to build a sustainable future for South Africa to come, for sure. And ultimately, you spoke about decision making. How do we actually improve this, right? In managing our existing assets better, as well as thinking of the assets of the future. How do we improve our decision making, and what are the key critical things that we actually need to focus on to improve in that space?
Yeah, I think there was an earlier point around knowing yourself that you made. You cannot make good decisions if you don't know yourself, and I think as a country we need to be very clear about ourselves. We need to be very clear about what we want, because out of that clarity, then you are able to gauge whether is this a good thing for me or not. The current conversation, at least that started, was energy transition, and of course working with the Germans, we too in the organization are talking about energy transition and so on, right? And then when you come to South Africa says, oh, well, actually it is not energy transition, it is just energy transition, right? Yeah. And then you say, okay, that's clear. For me, that is ultimately a good reflection on, now we are starting to understand ourselves, we are starting to understand what we do need to do. Then you are able to open up a door for decision making, because when you start saying no to the Europeans and say, no, actually for us it's not energy transition, it is just energy transition. For me, it sends a good sense of confidence around what we do need to do to manage our assets better.
Yeah.
Because you've defined what you really want to cover, right? So that's a critical part for me. The first one is know yourself, know what you really want to do. Then, of course, like any other decision-making role that you have to fulfill, you need good information.
Yeah.
And the necessary ingredient for us for good information as a country perspective is go and benchmark, go and learn, go and consult, go and speak to various people, and then add up all that information to then decide, based on what I know and what I want to achieve, what then should I do given the landscape. So in this case, collaborate with the Europeans, collaborate with the Asians and Americans and everybody else within Africa, and then come back and say, okay, so this is a best course of action for us in order to manage our assets better. Then I would still come back and say the last part then from there on is to ensure that you have a good pipeline of people and talent and skill sets. You talk about engineers, non-engineers, we all need those to be able to improve your decision making. One thing to make a good decision now, but if you want to improve your decision making, you need the diversity of the people.
Yeah.
You need the multiplicity of the mindsets that you have in the room or in the topic itself.
For sure.
Those for me, I think those are necessary ingredients that will improve our decision making.
And I think those are critical ingredients, right, that you've shared, that I absolutely think we need to take heed. Firstly, around knowing yourself. What are your requirements? What are what makes you different in terms of your requirements? What makes you different in terms of your capacity and your ability? And around also thinking towards the future in terms of the information that you have, having the right information, having a diverse team of people, a diverse pipeline of people who are coming through, who can bring in different perspective and views, I think is incredibly important. So thank you very much for sharing that with us. Thabo, unfortunately, that does bring us to an end. That whizzed by, unfortunately, but this was an absolute, absolutely insightful, impactful interview and chat. And firstly, I just want to thank you for availing, firstly, of your time to chat with me and with our listener community, to helping us to build the impactful conversations community, to educate and to inspire people. I have absolutely no doubt that that has happened. If anybody is listening to this and watching this once we do, publish it, absolutely no doubt that that has happened, and absolutely no doubt that many, many people are better for it, for having listened to you, give your insights, give your take on how we can build the future, particularly I think around the perspective of thinking bigger than just us, thinking regionally and thinking sustainably, in terms of building what I think you called it, the super grid, the African super grid. Absolutely love that, and thank you so much. I hope that you've also enjoyed it as well and enjoyed the experience.
Yeah, I did, and thanks for the opportunity. I think this is a wonderful platform, Thabos. I would encourage you to reach out to as many people as possible. I do not consider myself an expert per se, but I think I have I've had sufficient, and I still enjoy the exposure that I've seen. And it's important that we start packaging these conversations, right?
Absolutely.
Because maybe what I have shared, someone can build on it. Yep. Someone might have a different perspective, and it's good. So I thank you for the opportunity as well, and the invitation. And I wish you all the success with this platform as well, and the conversations forward.
Thank you, Thabo, and the honor and the pleasure is all mine. Thank you very much. To you, the listener, from Thabo and myself, thank you very much for listening to our fireside chat. I hope you've enjoyed it. I hope we've taken you on a wonderful journey, which has now come to an end. But we look forward to seeing you in the next episodes on this platform, and I look forward to welcoming Thabo back again sometime in the future. But from him and myself, we want to say thank you very much and goodbye.
Thank you. You take care. Bye.